I'm going to show you the crochet chain method of a provisional cast on. And in order to do this cast on, you need a scrap yarn that is a similar size to your project yarn. You could use a crochet hook or the knitting needle that is close to the size of the appropriate size for your yarn. You could also just use your fingers for the crochet chain part. You'll need your knitting needles, of course, for the knitting. All right, so in this case, the tan yarn is going to be my scrap yarn, and the pink will be the knitting. So this begins with a slip knot. And now, if you don't have a crochet hook, you can use your knitting needle to make a chain stitch. You put your knitting needle through the slip knot. You hold the tail separately from your working yarn. You wrap your working yarn and then you pull it through the slip knot as if the slip knot was a stitch. And then you can just keep on doing that to create a chain. You can also just use your fingers to create this chain by making your slip knot, a big slip knot, or a big opening, big loop, and then just pulling your working yarn through the loop, tightening it, not all the way though, you want it to be a little bit open down here. And then you just keep on pulling your working yarn through the loop until you get the chain that's at least the number of your desired number of cast on stitches. Make a long chain of stitches like so, like that. Or if you do have a crochet hook handy, you have your slip knot, you put your slip knot on your crochet hook, then you wrap the working yarn around your crochet hook and you pull it through the slip knot, and you then wrap and pull through the new stitch that's on your hook. So you do that at least to the number of the stitches that you need cast on. You can always do extra. This scrap yarn portion, this crochet chain, is going to be removed from your project. This is a provisional cast on, which means that it's temporary. So I'm going to chain like this. So now you've got your crochet chain. When you've got the right number, you snip your tail and just pull that through like so. Now, if you look at this crochet chain, you can see on this side there are lots of V shapes, and then if you flip it over 180, you can see on this side there are lots of dashes. If you look at it from the side, here the V's are on the left-hand side over here, and then the dashes are on the right-hand side right here. Those little bumps that you can see are the dashes. So when you are going to start your project with your main color yarn, you're going to use those bumps, the dashes, to work with. So what you're going to do is then with your knitting needle, that's your project size needle, you're going to go underneath one of the first bumps with your needle. So so right under there. Then use your project yarn, wrap it around your needle as usual, and pull it through as if it was a knit stitch. So now you've got one stitch cast on. And then you find the next bump, slide your needle under that, wrap your yarn around your needle, pull it through the bump, 2 stitches cast on. And you continue in that way until you have the right number of stitches. Now, if you've got extra bumps, it's okay if you accidentally skip one. But if you only chained as many stitches as you exactly need, then you need to get every single bump. So do be careful when you look at your chain that you go right into the next bump. So under this bump, wrap the yarn, pull it through. Let's get 10 on here and then take a look. All right, so here is your crochet chain. You can see the V's because we didn't use the V's to cast on. We worked through the back of it, the bumps, and there are the bumps. They kind of turn into purl bumps when you knit through that chain. All right, so then I'm going to get my other needle and I'm going to purl back on this row of 10 as usual. Just leave the chain in there. Right, I'm going to knit a little bit of stockinette stitch on these 10 stitches, and then I'll show you how to take that provisional chain out of your knitted piece. Alright, so here is the swatch with the provisional cast on. I just worked away from the cast on so it'll be easier to see what's happening with this crochet chain. So now, your instructions will ask you to remove your provisional cast on chain so that you can expose some live stitches that you pick up with your needle. So what you do is, in order to get the crochet chain to unzip, you loosen the very last loop where you pulled the tail through. You just pull the tail back out like so, and then you zip out your chain. And the first one is going to be sort of twisted around the edge there, so you just pull it like this, and then you can unzip these live stitches. They just kind of get released from the chain. Now go all the way to the end. Go slowly so that you don't yank the loops completely loose. All right, so now you've got all these live stitches here. You know we needed 10, so we've just double check that we can maintain 10. Take all these out. Count the loops that we've got here. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Great. So then you take another needle, and you can start off with one that's smaller than your project if you like. It might be easier to pick up these stitches without worrying about undoing them. So you just slide your needle into each of these stitches. so. Count them again, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Great. And so now you see we've got the stitches that we knit away on our regular project here, the rest of the swatch. And then we've got the stitches that we picked up from our provisional cast on down here. Now, sometimes what you'll need to do is then start working away this direction for your project. And that's the whole reason, is that probably you've knit some more of your project over here. You've got a body of knitting here, and at one point you might pick up stitches along one side or the other and then come back to this provisional cast on. You begin to work these stitches so that you can build the fabric in a symmetric way, away on this side and away on that side. So I'm going to use a contrast color yarn just so that you can see, we can know where the seam is. Take away my scrap yarn, and then we'll use these live stitches so then you can just start knitting away. Chances are you're still using your project yarn. You're not going to use a contrast color. I'm just doing this for demonstration. So you might just double check also when you put your needle back through the live stitches that were released from your crochet chain. Sometimes they get put back on the needle in the wrong orientation, so you might need to knit some of them through the back loop to untwist them. So far these have been oriented correctly, so I'm just going to knit them as usual. All right, so then let me just purl back on this, and it will give us some distance from the seam, and I can show you how the place where we started to knit off in the other direction looks almost seamless from your provisional cast on. There, so you can see. There's no extra ridge here. It just transitions right into the blue knitting without any bump on either side. So that's how that works. One thing, it is sort of an illusion that the stitches on this needle are coming from directly the same column as this needle. They are not. They're actually shifted 1/2 of a stitch over. But unless you really study it closely, it's hard to tell. So you look at this stitch here, and you can see the V's that it's coming from here. If you just follow those V's down, all of a sudden you find yourself in between these two stitches right there. And then in reverse, if you follow this stitch and its V column up to this needle, you find yourself in the middle of here. So they're not exactly, this stitch is not coming from the same column of stitches exactly as this 4th stitch. They're shifted by just 1/2 a stitch each. So there you have it. Thank you. And there's one other way that you can do a provisional cast on with a crochet chain, and I'm going to show you that one next. So this time you do indeed need a crochet hook. The other one I think you can manage without if you don't have one, but this one is a little more necessary. So you start with a slip knot, you put your hook through the slip knot and tighten it, and then you bring your knitting needle and you hold it next to your crochet hook. So my tail is down here below, and my working yarn is above the needle. And what I do is I then wrap the working yarn around both the knitting needle and my crochet hook, like so. And then I bring the hook through the slip knot, like so. And I do that again and again to make this number of stitches that I need. So I've got my working yarn, it's on top of my knitting needle. Wrap it around both my knitting needle and my crochet hook. And then pull the wrapped yarn through my stitch on my needle, or my hook rather. And continue above my knitting needle, around both needles. Pull that through the loop. Above the knitting needle, around both the needle and the hook. Pull it through. You continue to do that until you get the correct number of stitches. Now this time you do want to make sure that the number of stitches that's on your needles is the number of stitches that you need for your project. So let's see what we've got. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Let's go to 12 on this one. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. All right. So I've got 12 on my knitting needle. So I'm going to slide this down just a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is just crochet a little bit of a chain, not wrapping it around my knitting needle, just around the crochet hook. So then it will be obvious to me later, thanks to this chain, which end I'm going to start unzipping from. Alright, so once you get 5 or 6 extra chain stitches on there, you can snip that end and pull it through. And then with the way that I was wrapping my yarn around the needle and the hook, this causes my stitches that are now on my needle to be oriented in an open way instead of the normal way on my needle. It's these stitches will need to be knit through the back loop. I'm just going to adjust this first one so I can show you what the orientation looks like if it's correct. So I'm just going to spin this one on here just to show you. So this is what a stitch usually looks like on your needles, and it looks like you just would slide in here. But when you cast on with this method, your first row will be oriented in an open way like this, and so you're going to knit this stitch through the back loop for this first row. So then you bring your working yarn and you begin knitting through the back loop this row of stitches. The result of this different way is the same as the other one. There's no difference in the way that it will look or the way, the way your fabric will be. It's just the method that you use to do it. If you don't have a crochet hook that is close to the size of your knitting project needles, then this might be the way to go, because this way, because you're wrapping the provisional cast on, the first row is getting wrapped around your knitting needle and not just okay. I'm going to knit some stockinette stitch away from my provisional chain, just like the other swatch. here's my swatch. And so now it's time to get my live stitches from my provisional cast on. So just like before, you need to loosen this where you tied off the tail. Pull that out, and then you unzip your crochet chain and just keep on pulling, and you'll see that the live stitches will get released from the crochet chain. The last one is twisted a little bit, so once you get the last loop out, then I pull from the other end and take the whole tail out, because this slip knot could cause your stitch, that live stitch, to fall through. Okay, then you take your spare needle and you put these stitches back on your other needle, like so. Double check your count. I have 12, 2, 4, 6, 8. Oh, I've got 11. So there's one that's missing. It's probably this one over here. So, oops, this should be in the back. There. So now I should have 12 on both needles. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Okay, great. So there is the other one now, just so I can show you with the contrast yarn how this works. You knit off in the other direction. So that because the stitches are offset, the provisional cast on stitches are offset by 1/2 column, like I showed you with the other technique. Sometimes when you are picking up your live stitches, one of them is kind of missing because you're half off, and so you might need to pick it up from one side or the other side. It won't be a dropped stitch if you're missing one. It won't be a drop stitch because you're working in the other direction. The stitches don't drop up, they will only drop down. So there we go. So you've got the new stitches that are coming away from your provisional cast on edge, and you can't tell the difference. There's no ridge or seam on either side.